Have you ever faced a moment so humiliating that it shook your confidence to the core? Imagine being a young student, full of potential, only to be crushed by the very person meant to nurture your growth. Today's story is about Lily, a 13-year-old girl who faced the sharp sting of prejudice from her teacher, Mr. Harrison, in one of the most elite schools in the country. But what this teacher didn't know was who her mother truly was, a woman whose strength and determination would turn this story on its head. Before we dive into this powerful tale of resilience, justice, and redemption, let me ask you, where are you watching this from? Drop it in the comments. And don't forget to like, subscribe, and turn on notifications because this story is just the beginning. Together, we'll uncover life lessons that inspire and empower. Now, let's set the stage. Westview Preparatory School, a prestigious institution where ambition and privilege collide. But beneath its polished exterior lies a darker truth, one that Lily and her mother, Adeline, are about to expose. This is a journey of standing up against injustice and redefining what it means to belong. Are you ready to dive in? Stay tuned, because you won't want to miss how this story unfolds. The story begins at Westview Preparatory School, an institution often described as the crown jewel of elite education. Its manicured lawns and towering stone buildings were a symbol of prestige, where the children of the rich and powerful were groomed to become tomorrow's leaders. But behind the facade of academic excellence lay a culture steeped in favoritism, where a student's worth often depended on their last name or the size of their parents' bank account. For Lily, a scholarship student from a modest background, this environment was both an opportunity and a challenge. At just 13, she was already standing at the crossroads of two worlds. On one side was her humble home, where her single mother, Adeline, worked tirelessly to provide for her daughter. On the other, the glittering privilege of Westview, where the smallest misstep could make her a target. Her days were a balancing act. She excelled academically, often topping her class, but her success wasn't always celebrated. In fact, it drew the ire of certain classmates and even some teachers who felt that a scholarship student had no business outshining their wealthier peers. Among them was Mr. Harrison, a senior history teacher who was both respected and feared, known for his sharp tongue and intimidating demeanor. He wielded his authority with an iron grip. To him, Lily was an anomaly, a poor girl in a rich world, and he didn't hesitate to make his feelings known. The tension between them had been building for months, but it reached a boiling point during a class presentation. Lily had spent weeks researching and preparing, determined to prove herself, but as she stood before the class, presenting her findings with poise and confidence, Mr. Harrison interrupted her mid-sentence. "That's enough," he said, his voice dripping with condescension. "It's clear you don't belong here. Maybe next time, stick to topics you can actually understand." The words hung in the air like a slap. The classroom fell silent, all eyes on Lily as she struggled to maintain her composure. Her cheeks burned with humiliation, but she refused to cry. Instead, she finished her presentation, her voice trembling but steady, and returned to her seat. What Mr. Harrison didn't realize was that his words had lit a fire within her, a fire fueled by years of watching her mother overcome obstacles that would have broken most people. Adeline wasn't just a single mother working multiple jobs to support her daughter. She was a woman who had faced her own share of prejudice and injustice and emerged stronger for it. When Lily recounted the incident to her mother that evening, Adeline listened quietly, her expression a mix of anger and determination. "They think they can decide who belongs and who doesn't," she said, "but they're wrong. And we're going to show them just how wrong they are." Adeline's words weren't just a promise. They were a declaration of war. What followed was a journey of courage, strategy, and unshakable belief in one another. Together, Lily and her mother would challenge the status quo, standing up not only for themselves, but for every student who had ever been made to feel like they didn't belong. Through their efforts, they would uncover a deeper truth about the school's culture, exposing the cracks in its foundation and forcing it to confront its own biases. But this wasn't just a fight for justice, it was a story of love, resilience, and the unbreakable bond between a mother and daughter. As we delve deeper into their journey, let's take a moment to reflect. How often do we let others dictate our worth? How many times have we stood silent in the face of injustice, thinking it was easier to accept the status quo than to fight back? Lily and Adeline's story reminds us that change begins with the courage to say, "Enough is enough." So, as we continue, keep this question in mind. What would you do if someone tried to tell you that you didn't belong? Would you let them define your worth? Or would you rise above and prove them wrong? Lily Tran wasn't supposed to stand out. In the gleaming halls of Westview Preparatory School, her scholarship status marked her as other. She was the outsider, a girl from a modest neighborhood, carrying the weight of her family's dreams on her slim shoulders. But Lily was no ordinary student. Beneath her quiet demeanor was a fierce intellect, an unwavering determination, and a fire sparked by her mother's sacrifices. Her mother, Adeline, had always been Lily's anchor. A single parent who worked long hours as a seamstress, Adeline's life was a testament to resilience. She had often told Lily, "We don't let the world define us. We define ourselves." And it was this lesson that guided Lily through the labyrinth of privilege and prejudice that defined Westview. But even the strongest resolve can be tested. In the first semester of her 8th grade, Lily found herself in the crosshairs of Mr. Harrison, a senior history teacher whose disdain for her was barely concealed. Mr. Harrison wasn't just a teacher. He was an institution at Westview, a man whose opinion carried weight with both students and faculty. For weeks, his subtle jabs chipped away at Lily's confidence. Comments about her limited perspective and her lack of understanding of cultural nuances weren't just criticisms, they were veiled insults, targeting her background. Yet Lily endured, her mother's words echoing in her mind like a mantra, "We define ourselves." The breaking point came during the school's annual debate competition. Lily, representing her class, had spent sleepless nights researching and preparing her arguments. The topic, meritocracy, myth or reality, was one she felt deeply connected to. Standing on the stage, she delivered her points with clarity and conviction, her voice carrying the weight of lived experience. But as the applause began, Mr. Harrison, who was a judge for the event, stood up and spoke. His voice, sharp and dismissive, cut through the room like a blade. "While your enthusiasm is commendable, Miss Tran," he said, "it's evident that your understanding of the subject lacks depth. Perhaps next time, you'll consider a topic more suited to your experience." The room fell silent. Lily stood frozen, the sting of humiliation piercing through her like a dagger. For a moment, she felt small, insignificant, a girl who didn't belong. But then, as she looked into the audience and saw her mother's unwavering gaze, something shifted. That night, Lily and Adeline sat together at their small kitchen table, the faint hum of the city outside their window. Adeline listened as Lily recounted the event, her voice trembling with anger and frustration. When Lily finished, Adeline reached across the table and took her hand. "They can question your place here, Lily," she said, her voice steady, "but they can't take away who you are. You have the right to be here, to excel, and to challenge anyone who tries to tell you otherwise. We don't let them define us. We fight." From that moment on, the Trans were no longer content to endure. They decided to act. Adeline reached out to the school's board, filing a formal complaint against Mr. Harrison for his discriminatory behavior. Lily, in turn, focused on excelling in every aspect of her education, turning her humiliation into motivation. Their journey wasn't easy. Adeline faced resistance from the school, where complaints against long-standing faculty were often dismissed. Lily encountered whispers and cold stares from classmates who sided with Mr. Harrison, but they refused to back down. In the months that followed, their efforts began to bear fruit. Adeline's persistence forced the school to investigate, revealing a pattern of bias in Mr. Harrison's behavior. Meanwhile, Lily's achievements, academic awards, extracurricular successes, and an essay that won a national competition began to shift the narrative. By the end of the school year, Mr. Harrison was asked to resign, and Westview was forced to reckon with the culture it had fostered. The administration introduced new policies to ensure greater accountability, and Lily became a symbol of resilience and courage for her peers. But for Lily and Adeline, the victory was more than just personal. It was a testament to the power of standing up for what's right. They hadn't just fought for themselves. They had paved the way for others to challenge the status quo. Lily's story is a reminder that even in the face of systemic injustice, change is possible. It begins with a single voice, refusing to be silenced, and grows into a movement that redefines the narrative for everyone. History and contemporary events are filled with stories that resonate with Lily's journey, tales of individuals or groups standing up against systemic barriers, societal biases, and entrenched power structures. These real-world cases not only inspire but also teach us valuable lessons about perseverance, courage, and the transformative power of action. Malala Yousafzai, a voice for education. In 2012, the world was shaken by the story of Malala Yousafzai, a young girl from Pakistan who defied the Taliban's oppressive ban on girls' education. Malala's advocacy for education began when she was just 11 years old, writing an anonymous blog about life under Taliban rule. Her bravery made her a target, and she was shot in an assassination attempt. Malala's survival and subsequent activism turned her into a global icon. She went on to become the youngest ever Nobel Peace Prize laureate at the age of 17. Her story teaches us the importance of resilience and the impact one voice can have in challenging systemic oppression. Despite the risks, Malala refused to stay silent, proving that even in the face of life-threatening adversity, change is possible when one chooses courage over fear. Lesson: standing up for what you believe in, even in hostile environments, can lead to transformative change, not just for oneself but for countless others. The Civil Rights Movement, collective action for equality. In the 1960s, the Civil Rights Movement in the United States demonstrated the power of collective action in the fight against racial segregation and inequality. Leaders like Martin Luther King Jr., Rosa Parks, and John Lewis led protests, marches, and sit-ins that challenged the status quo. One of the most iconic moments was the Montgomery bus boycott, sparked by Rosa Parks' refusal to give up her seat to a white passenger. The boycott lasted over a year and resulted in the Supreme Court ruling that segregation on public buses was unconstitutional. This movement was not just about individuals, but about a community coming together to demand justice. It showed that sustained effort, combined with strategic planning and unwavering determination, could dismantle systemic injustices that had persisted for decades. Lesson: while individual bravery is essential, collective action amplifies the fight for equality and creates enduring change. The hashtag #MeToo movement, redefining accountability. The hashtag #MeToo movement, which gained global traction in 2017, highlighted the pervasive issue of sexual harassment and assault, particularly in workplaces. Sparked by revelations about powerful figures in Hollywood, the movement encouraged survivors to share their stories, breaking decades of silence and stigma. This movement had far-reaching impacts, leading to policy changes in workplaces, heightened awareness about consent and power dynamics, and legal consequences for perpetrators. The hashtag became more than a trend. It became a rallying cry for accountability and cultural change. Lesson: transparency and collective storytelling can disrupt long-standing cultures of abuse, showing that power structures can be challenged when victims and allies unite. Greta Thunberg, youth activism and climate change. In 2018, a 15-year-old Swedish girl named Greta Thunberg began skipping school on Fridays to protest outside the Swedish parliament, demanding stronger action on climate change. Her solitary protests soon sparked a global movement known as Fridays for Future, inspiring millions of young people to demand accountability from world leaders. Despite facing criticism and ridicule, Greta's unwavering commitment has placed her at the forefront of climate activism. Her speeches at international summits, including the United Nations, have underscored the urgency of the climate crisis and the need for immediate action. Lesson: age and experience are not prerequisites for making a difference. Passion, clarity, and determination can inspire global change. Levi Strauss & Company, corporate accountability and inclusion. On the corporate front, the story of Levi Strauss & Company, offers an example of a business taking a stand for social justice. In the late 1990s, the company implemented one of the first global workplace standards, prioritizing fair labor practices and ethical sourcing. More recently, Levi's has championed diversity, equity, and inclusion within its organization, becoming a model for corporate accountability. Levi's actions demonstrate that businesses can play a pivotal role in challenging systemic issues, from workplace inequities to broader societal injustices. Lesson: institutions, like individuals, have the power to lead change by prioritizing ethics over profit and taking tangible steps to align their values with their actions. Synthesis: what these stories teach us. From individuals like Malala and Greta to movements like #MeToo and the civil rights movement, and even corporations like Levi's, these examples show that the fight against systemic challenges requires courage, collaboration, and persistence. Lily's story, though fictional, mirrors these real-world cases in its core message. Transformation starts with a refusal to accept the status quo, whether through individual defiance, collective action, or institutional leadership. Change is driven by those who dare to challenge the barriers before them. Takeaway for all of us: the most profound changes in history often begin with a single step, a decision to speak out, take action, or simply refuse to give up. The lessons from these cases remind us that anyone, regardless of background or circumstance, has the power to redefine their story and, in doing so, reshape the world around them. Adeline's fight wasn't just about one woman standing up for her daughter in a classroom. It was the culmination of a lifetime of battles against prejudice, discrimination, and the struggle for equality. Raised in a world where opportunities were often withheld because of her race, Adeline learned early on that simply existing in spaces designed for others often meant having to fight for your right to be seen, heard, and respected. As a young Black woman growing up in the late 80s, Adeline saw firsthand the systemic inequalities that pervaded even the most prestigious institutions. She excelled academically, but her achievements were always questioned, overlooked, or belittled by peers and mentors who saw her skin color before her capabilities. Whether it was in school, later in the workplace, or even at community events, Adeline faced constant reminders that her success would never be measured the same as her white counterparts. But the biggest lesson she learned was not to accept this as normal. Instead, she chose to fight, and fight she did. Whether it was challenging her teachers in high school when they underestimated her intelligence, advocating for equal pay when she entered the corporate world, or questioning the subtle biases in her children's school system, every injustice she faced fueled her resolve to ensure her children wouldn't experience the same hardships. By the time Lily enrolled in her new school, Adeline had already spent years confronting and navigating these challenges. As a mother, she was determined that Lily would not only survive but thrive, regardless of the biases she might face. She prepared her daughter, teaching her to speak up, to demand respect, and to never allow anyone to diminish her worth. Yet, even Adeline couldn't have predicted the scale of the obstacles Lily would encounter. When Lily began to experience outright discrimination at the hands of her teacher, Adeline knew she had to take action. But her approach was different this time. She wasn't just fighting for her daughter. She was fighting for a better future for all the students who might one day walk through those same doors. She understood that one fight could become a symbol, a catalyst for change within the institution. Her fight wasn't just personal. It was about breaking the cycle for the generations that would follow. Adeline's decision to take this battle public was not an easy one. She knew it could lead to backlash, that the school system might try to silence her, or worse, portray her as an angry parent instead of a mother advocating for justice. But her years of dealing with the biases of the world had prepared her for this moment. She wasn't going to back down, and she wasn't going to let her daughter's experience be another story swept under the rug. She was ready to demand accountability. In many ways, Adeline's journey mirrored the long history of civil rights struggles in America. It echoed the voices of those who had fought against segregation, inequality, and oppression. Her battle was not just a reflection of her own experiences. It was tied to the legacy of the countless individuals who had stood before her. whose struggles paved the way for the fight she was now leading. Adeline was not only raising her voice for Lily, but for all the children who would one day look back at this moment and see it as part of the larger story of progress. The parallels to the civil rights movement were not lost on her. Adeline often reflected on the sacrifices of the past, the courage of those who marched, who protested, and who fought for the rights she now held. She drew strength from these histories, knowing that, just like them, her voice could make a difference. In 2025, the landscape of parenting and advocacy is inextricably linked to the ongoing societal conversations about systemic inequalities, educational reform, and the fight for equality. As society continues to evolve, parents face a host of new challenges and opportunities when it comes to advocating for their children's rights, access to education, and equal treatment. The landscape of educational systems has changed dramatically over the past decades, but one constant remains: the fight against discrimination in all its forms is far from over. Parenting in 2025 requires not only the ability to navigate an increasingly complex world, but also the resilience to challenge systems that may still be rooted in historical biases. In many ways, today's parents are more equipped than ever to identify subtle forms of discrimination, whether it's racial, gender-based, or socioeconomic. But they are also facing new complexities in the age of digitalization, AI, and an ever-expanding range of social issues. For many, advocating for their children's rights in the educational space is an extension of their broader commitment to creating a more just world. In Adeline's case, her fight for Lily at school is not just about one child. It's emblematic of a larger societal trend where more parents, especially those from marginalized communities, are finding themselves on the front lines of advocacy. In this digital age, the fight has moved into public forums, where social media, blogs, and podcasts amplify voices that might otherwise be silenced. Platforms for advocacy have expanded, offering parents a broader reach, but also creating new challenges in terms of accountability and the risk of misinformation. The need for parental advocacy has never been more apparent. A growing awareness of systemic inequalities in the education system has pushed many parents to question traditional structures and demand change. Across the country, parents are challenging discriminatory policies, questioning standardized testing, and pushing for more inclusive curricula that reflect the diversity of student bodies. These advocacy efforts are not just about calling out individual instances of prejudice. They are about creating long-term, systemic change that fosters an environment of inclusivity and equity for all students. Yet, the ability to engage in meaningful advocacy often depends on the social and economic resources available to parents. Parents like Adeline, who are equipped with the knowledge, experience, and community support to challenge institutional biases, are in a better position to create real change. However, for many parents in underprivileged or marginalized communities, the fight is even harder. Lack of access to education about their rights, resources to mount an effective challenge, or even time due to economic pressures, all play a significant role in limiting their ability to advocate for their children. A growing trend in parenting advocacy is the emphasis on teaching children how to navigate and confront discrimination. Parents are increasingly aware that empowering their children to advocate for themselves in real time is essential to overcoming adversity. This means fostering critical thinking skills, building confidence, and teaching children not only how to challenge unfair practices, but also how to navigate systems that may not be designed for their success. The advocacy aspect of parenting in 2025 is also shaped by technology. While the internet has given parents and children alike access to vast amounts of information, it has also brought new challenges. Online bullying, misinformation, and the digital divide are ever-present threats. Parents must navigate not only traditional biases, but also the complex online environment where racial, gender, and socioeconomic stereotypes can be amplified at an alarming rate. Social media platforms, while providing a space for activism, can also be breeding grounds for toxicity, where parents and children alike must learn to assert their voices responsibly while protecting their mental health. Moreover, the COVID-19 pandemic has left an indelible mark on both parenting and education. pushing many parents into more active roles in their children's learning processes. With widespread school closures and the shift to remote learning, parents had to become more involved in their children's education, advocating not only for their well-being, but also for more inclusive and equitable access to resources. This experience exposed many of the cracks in the education system, especially when it came to disparities in access to technology, support services, and educational materials. The pandemic has, in many ways, reignited a larger conversation about how education should look in the 21st century, with an emphasis on equity, accessibility, and inclusivity. One area where parents are increasingly involved is advocating for mental health support in schools. As students face increasing levels of anxiety, depression, and trauma, parents are pushing for better mental health resources to be integrated into school curricula and systems. This advocacy is especially crucial for students from marginalized communities, who often face additional barriers to accessing mental health care. Parents are demanding that schools provide not just academic education, but a holistic approach to student well-being that includes mental health services, culturally competent counselors, and trauma-informed teaching practices. The role of advocacy is also tied to larger societal movements, such as the continued fight for racial justice, gender equality, and LGBTQ+ rights. In 2025, more parents are engaging with these movements, not only through protest but by ensuring that their children understand the importance of standing up for justice in their everyday lives. This involves teaching children how to question authority, stand up against bullying, and speak out against discrimination. Many parents are looking to create a new generation of activists, children who can carry the fight for equality and justice into the future. Finally, the role of parenting and advocacy in 2025 is deeply tied to a vision of a better, more inclusive future. Adeline's fight for Lily is not just an isolated case. It is part of a larger, growing movement of parents, students, and educators who are reshaping the educational system to better reflect the diversity of the world in which we live. The changes being fought for today will shape the educational experiences of future generations. And it is up to the advocates of today, parents, teachers, students, and allies, to ensure that these changes move us toward a world where every child, regardless of race, gender, or socioeconomic background, has an equal chance to thrive. As we conclude this exploration into the challenges and triumphs of parenting and advocacy in 2025, it's clear that the journey toward equality and fairness in education is far from over. Adeline's fight for Lily represents not just one family's struggle but a wider, ongoing battle that parents and educators continue to face every day. In a world that is constantly evolving, particularly in the context of systemic discrimination and technological advancement, the need for continued advocacy and engagement has never been more pressing. The lessons we've learned from Adeline's journey should not be seen as isolated incidents, but rather as stepping stones in a larger movement toward a more inclusive society. Every fight against prejudice, whether in the classroom or within society, contributes to the broader push for justice and fairness. Each small victory can lead to greater change, and it is through these collective efforts that we begin to see true transformation. The future of education, parenting, and advocacy is interconnected. We are at a crossroads where, as a society, we have the opportunity to reshape systems that have long perpetuated inequality. Through the hard work of parents, educators, and activists, both in the streets and online, we can hold institutions accountable, demand better policies, and ensure that future generations have the tools they need to succeed in a world that values diversity and equality. However, the fight is not over. If anything, it is just beginning. We must continue to advocate for policies that support every child's right to an inclusive, equitable education. Whether that means confronting biases within school systems or challenging the outdated structures that continue to disadvantage marginalized communities. As we reflect on the story of Lily and the broader societal struggles that it represents, it's vital to understand that each of us has a role to play in advocating for change. For parents, this means continuing to push for better support systems, more inclusive curricula, and stronger protections for children facing discrimination. It means standing up against prejudice policies and fighting for equitable access to resources. Parents, like Adeline, must continue to be the changemakers, pushing boundaries and demanding that every child, regardless of their background, has access to the same opportunities. For educators, the responsibility is equally significant. Teachers must advocate for themselves and their students, working to create an environment that nurtures every child's potential. This means understanding the complexities of their students' lives, addressing implicit biases, and ensuring that all children feel seen and valued in the classroom. Teachers have the unique opportunity to shape the future, and it is through their influence that much of the change will take place. But advocacy doesn't stop at the level of parents and teachers. Community members, local organizations, and policymakers must also come together to create a society that values education for all. The role of government in addressing educational inequities cannot be overstated. It is essential that policy changes are made at every level, from local school boards to national legislation, to ensure that systemic discrimination is eradicated and replaced with an educational framework that values and supports every child. As we face the complexities of 2025, we must remember that we are all interconnected. The fight for equity in education is a collective endeavor. It requires solidarity, persistence, and a deep commitment to justice, whether it's through challenging discriminatory practices, supporting advocacy groups, or simply engaging in conversations that raise awareness. Every action counts. To those who have been moved by the stories shared here, Adeline's, Lily's, and others, now is the time to act. The future of education depends on the voices of those who are willing to speak up and stand together. If you are a parent, consider how you can advocate for your child's education. Look into local organizations that are fighting for educational reform and see how you can get involved. If you are an educator, continue to challenge the status quo, strive for inclusivity, and support your students as they navigate the complex challenges of today's world. For all of us, it's time to take action and build a more just and equitable world for the next generation. This is your call to action. Engage, whether through social media, community forums, or in-person meetings. Engage in conversations that challenge discrimination and promote inclusivity in education. Advocate, get involved with organizations that support educational reform. Speak to your local school boards. Engage with policymakers, and push for changes that benefit all children. Educate, share the knowledge you've gained through this video with others. Help raise awareness about the ongoing struggles and triumphs in the fight for educational equity. Support marginalized communities by donating, volunteering, or amplifying their voices. The fight for equality in education cannot be won alone. It requires a collective effort. Act whether it's calling out biases, supporting initiatives that promote diversity, or standing up for students. Your actions can make a difference. Small changes lead to significant transformations. In the end, Adeline's fight for Lily is our fight. It is the fight of every parent who wants their child to have a fair shot at a bright future. It is the fight of every teacher who believes in the power of education to create lasting change. It is the fight of every community member who understands that we cannot succeed as a society if some children are left behind. Together, we can make sure that the story of Lily is not one of the few, but one that represents the victories of a generation that chose to stand up, fight back, and push for the changes we need. So, I urge you to take that first step, whether it's a conversation, a letter, a donation, or any form of advocacy. The future is waiting for us to act, and it is up to us to ensure that it is a future where every child can thrive, free from discrimination, and empowered to succeed.